And the medical part of it, is your opinion that changes the person's sex, so a female becomes male?
Well, the medical transition doesn't change somebody's sex. Your gender identity is set at birth, or even from conception. We don't know, so you can't change that. If you're born male, you can't change that. But what medical transition does is it can alter your body, because if you've got ovaries and your ovaries are producing estrogen, they will give you breasts and periods and a female shape, if you like. But that doesn't really fit with somebody who actually identifies as male. So you're changing the body to match their gender identity.
But you're still male. So someone who was born male who transitions to look more like a woman, they're still male?
No, their gender identity is female. If you ask them, then what their gender identity is, they say, I am female.
But sorry, I'm genuinely confused. I thought you can't change your sex.
When you say you can't change your sex, what do you mean? I mean, the Equality Act, it lists...
I just mean biologically. You're a doctor. I'm just asking a medical question.
Well, I'm just trying to clear up, because you're confused. I'm trying to clear up for you.
Help me.
Are you saying you can't change your chromosomes, or are you saying you can't change your body anatomy, or are you saying...
Well,
what are you saying?
It's actually, I think, gametes is my understanding of the biology of it, but you definitely can't change your chromosomes, right?
You definitely can't change chromosomes,
right.
no.
So then you would be still male. Legally, you can get a document saying you're a woman, but you're not female.
But your gender identity is not dictated by your chromosomes or your gametes or your body shape.
Or gender identity, no, but male and female are biological categories, right?
Do you mean, so you mean biological?
That's why I said sex, right? Sex. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I asked you, can you change sex? And you said no. And then when I asked you if a trans woman is female or male, you said they're female.
Let me explain.
Okay.
It's very difficult because the language is confusing, right? Okay, so if we go back to kind of basic law, look at the Equality Act, and there are 9 protected characteristics. And the Equality Act says, if you reassign your sex, okay, so that's the kind of the only words we have written down. You reassign your sex. So UK law understands that people reassign their sex. So the sex that was recorded and the gender that was recorded on their birth certificate, you can say, actually, that was a mistake. I had no say in that when I was born, and I would like to reassign my sex. And you know, people thought I was going to be a boy, but actually I'm a girl. So that's the kind of key words we have in UK
Well, that's
law.
legal. I'm just asking scientifically and biologically.
So are you asking, can somebody be transgender? Is that what you're asking? I don't understand what you're saying. What your confusion
I asked you whether puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones make somebody the opposite sex, and you said no.
No.
But when I asked you if they are then the opposite sex, you said yes. And that's what I'm confused about.
Let me clear up your confusion.
Yes, thank you.
So your hormones don't make you change sex. Hormones will change the shape of your body, will give you breasts, will give you facial hair, will maybe make your muscles bigger depending on which way you go. So hormones don't change your sex. You can't, that doesn't work like that.
Okay.
And you can't change your gender identity. It's fixed from when you were born, and you can't change it. What the mistake and the confusion is that we assign a label on a child when it's first born and say, aha, you've got a penis, so therefore you're going to be a boy. But actually when that person develops, they're like, that was wrong. I'm not a boy, I'm a girl.
Kelly, we've talked about quite a lot there. Any thoughts?
God, it's so much nonsense, isn't it? It's really difficult to keep up.
All right, guys, I had to make some time to respond to this trigonometry debate because this is the kind of debate that I have long wanted to moderate myself. And although I probably would have chosen different participants for the debate, at least in Kellie-Jay Keen's part, but we'll get to why I say that later. But, you know, this is, while I was listening to this podcast, I found myself pretty frustrated, kind of yelling at the screen. I mean, not literally, I don't actually do that, but you know, in your head, you're going, God, like I had questions. I wish I could have asked some different questions at various points. I wish I could have been the one to answer questions at various points, and really from both sides, because oftentimes when I am watching gender debates, I find myself wishing that I could respond for both sides or for multiple sides of the debate, you know, and yeah. So instead, I'm making this video where I'm just going to respond to it. That way, I get to go through things kind of point by point here. You know, maybe you're here because you watched the trigonometry debate and you also found it frustrating and want someone to satisfy your brain on those points. Maybe you didn't watch the trigonometry debate because you don't like watching people have those debates and yelling at each other. It actually wasn't as bad, though, in terms of yelling over each other. Constantine does do a good job of moderating in that way. Or, maybe you'd have never heard of Triggernometry. And if not, then, check it out. It is a pretty cool podcast. Although, it's very British. There's a lot of British politics. And who cares about, I'm just kidding. Actually, it's cool to learn about British politics. Anyway, maybe you're interested in the gender war. Maybe you think I'm cute and your algorithm is confused. I don't know what. Thank you so much for being here. Either way, welcome to my channel. I have not been putting out content much lately, but I'm really wanting to. I've taken a full-time job. I've been working a lot since I moved to Houston a few months ago, and my life is finally getting in order. I've said that a number of times, but now it's true. Anyway, let's get into it. So much happens in this podcast, so I'm going to break things down into really short clips. So the first part that I want to talk about is just the very beginning of the clip that I've shown you.
Your gender identity is set at birth, or even from conception. We don't know.
Okay, so Helen says that gender identity is set at birth, if not earlier. If that's true, then does that mean that gender fluidity is not real?
If you feel inside that you don't align with being a man, you don't align with being a woman, sometimes you align with being a man, sometimes you align with being a woman, sometimes you feel somewhere in between, that would be gender fluidity.
All right, I'll play devil's advocate to my own question. Maybe everyone's gender identity is predestined from birth or earlier, including people whose gender identity changes on a weekly, daily, or even hourly basis.
Some people who are gender fluid, their pronouns change on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Other people who are gender fluid, their pronouns don't change at all. There's literally no criteria for being gender fluid.
But even if that's true, then what about the kids who say that they're really a boy or they're really a girl, but what if the fluidity is not coming till later? What if as a 3 to 12-year-old, the person's a boy, but they're actually gender fluid and don't realize that at 12 or 13, they're going to feel like a girl again, or vice versa. Maybe puberty is the thing that's going to set off their gender fluidity journey. How would we know that? Helen here definitively states that gender identity is set at birth. And then she says,
or even from conception, we don't know.
Okay, so you actually don't know. You're making a pretty big claim here about when gender identity is set, and then you admit you don't know. And when she says she's sure that identity is set by birth at latest, that's her claim, that it's definitely set at the latest by birth. Is she suggesting that that we can be sure that newborns have a gender identity because some babies have been seen to stare at certain objects longer than others, or because they grab for certain toys versus others? Maybe a 1.5-year-old's first words are cluing us into what their gender identity is. I understand that there are people who believe that 2, 3, and 4-year-olds can know their gender identity and have that be set. But how do we get birth? How do we get birth? If you're not sure whether it's at birth or even conception, are you really sure that it's set before the age of 2? I'm just trying to figure out how we're making these big claims, because I don't know how anyone would know that this gender identity, a concept that's up for debate, by the way, but even if you take for granted that there is a gender identity, how would we know that they're set by birth? Alternately, perhaps we live in a completely billiard ball-ass universe and every single one of us has a gender identity that was set at the Big Bang. And not every trans person will tell you that they knew their gender identity as a very young child, by the way. So I really don't know where Helen is getting that certainty from, where even getting that idea really from. A quick Reddit search, very quick Reddit search, I immediately found a couple of people who don't seem to be indicating that they really had a gender identity that was definitive as even very small children. I even know a trans woman who says that she actually doesn't think of herself as always having been female or felt female, but just a few years ago, she decided she'd prefer to live as a woman. So there's just a lot going on here, a lot more going on here than Helen is letting on. So when Helen says We don't know.
We don't know.
I really wish she would sit with that for a moment. I really wish she would sit and consider the uncertainty she has and the fact that she's admitting they really don't know when your gender identity, if that's a valid concept and exists for everyone. And to be fair, a lot of this comes from that John Money dude who thought that, there was that boy with the botched circumcision, and then he was like, all right, just cut the rest of the penis off then and raise him as a girl, and like, let's use him as a guinea pig because I have this idea that, however, we can just, they were behaviorists, who really thought, yeah, if you raise someone some way, then they'll just be that. So, these were real blank slate ass people. So yeah, they tried. They're like, all right, we'll just raise this guy as a girl. And then he grew up and got pretty unhappy about it, especially by puberty. And then at some point, and he was like, dude, I'm a boy. And at some point he unalived himself. Sorry, I really don't know all of YouTube's rules, and I'm not monetized yet anyway, so I don't know if it matters, if it's for the algorithm. But anyway, so trans activists will tell you that means that we all have a gender identity, and that like you can't just force someone to live, or if you try to force someone to live as the one that they're not, then it doesn't go well, which we don't know. I mean, that might be true for some people and not others. I mean, this is someone who was definitively male that they were trying to raise as female, so that doesn't necessarily mean that it works the exact same way for people who have gender dysphoria or people who consider themselves trans, or however you want to say it. I'm someone who doesn't really feel like I have a gender identity, but then maybe that just means that I'm, agender, non-binary, gender fluid myself. We don't have time to get into that today. The concept of gender fluidity, though, is an area where the queer world does not have their/our, to the extent that I'm queer, story straight. It's something that if you go with the Helen Webberly version of things, then that really implies that it's pretty hard to square the circle of people who claim to be gender fluid if you say everyone has a gender identity that is set no later than birth.
There are a lot of non-binary people who are gender fluid, moving through and among genders over the course of time. I'm non-binary, but that's not how I experience my gender as identity. I identify as omnigender and bigender, and the multitude of genders contained in those labels co-occur simultaneously instead of shifting over time. Instead of fluidity moving between and among, I would describe my experience to be more gender static, gender flux, where all of the genders remain constantly relevant, but the intensity can shift. Another word for gender static is chimenian. I found it on like the LGBTQIA wiki, and it is not to be confused with static gender, which is a xenogender. These words are new and can be used in a multitude of ways to describe a gender experience more definitively. And while I am bigender and gender static, there are also bigender people who are gender fluid. I think we understand each other pretty well, though. Okay, I hope that was helpful and not super confusing.
A lot of this stuff just kind of falls apart in terms of coherence when you start talking about identities past male, female, trans woman, trans man, okay? Let's think about agender people.
It's still like considered under the non-binary umbrella, but it's like basically you don't feel identified with like any gender at all.
If we're gonna do restrooms by your gender identity, then you would think a lot more agender people would be complaining that there's not enough restrooms for them. If anything, they're the ones who would have to go pee outside all the time, because maybe the ones that say unisex or family, they can come. Although unisex implies all sexes, this is one sex, but if the person doesn't have a sex, maybe they don't belong in that one. Okay, sports, let's talk about that. Then, okay, if trans women definitely should always be in women's sports, and trans men should definitely always be in men's sports, then agender people presumably should be complaining that there are no sports leagues for them most of the time. Sometimes there's combo ones or kind of unserious ones or exhibition things, but otherwise, most of the time, there's no sports for them. So why aren't we hearing an uproar from the agender community? Probably because none of them play sports. But I don't think I've ever met an agender person who played a single sport. Where are the complaints that agender people are being denied the fundamental right to play sports? It hasn't come up yet. Okay. By the way, I found this video.
My biggest problem with people that say that trans people shouldn't play sports is that sports aren't important enough to take someone else's rights away. They're just not. So shut the fuck up with that argument. Thank you.
Okay, honey, darling, babe. Perhaps then you could also consider the idea that maybe sports weren't important enough for the whole trans movement to hang themselves on. That maybe 0.05% of the population should just be able to give up sports in order for 50% of the population not to have an unfair disadvantage. Maybe sports weren't that important enough for such a tiny fraction of the population to make such a fuss about, when you have 66 to 79% of Americans being pretty annoyed at the idea that trans women would be in female sports. That includes 41% of Democrats who believe that trans women should not be in women's sports, and 14% more who are unsure. So in total, the majority of Democrats aren't like in favor of trans women in sports. So it's not just MAGA. You know, you could counter that argument by saying that at one point, 66 to 79% of Americans were in favor of slavery, and that, you know, we smart and good people need to pave the way, need to tell the dumb, bad people what to do. But I really still have never heard a good argument from anyone about the actual physiological advantages of trans women. For trans women who have gone through various years of male hormones, okay, they don't just have bigger muscles, which can fade to some extent on cross-sex levels of HRT. They also confer physiological advantages that just can't go back. You know, you can't put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to larger hands, larger feet, larger hearts and lungs, and VO2 max capacities. You have larger limbs. You have a narrower pelvis. You have less lateral stress on the knees. You have more bone density. And by the way, females do have some advantages in long-term sports. Those include really long-term endurance, like real endurance sports, and balancing and remembering people's birthdays. So let's make a sport, you know, some of the, you know, all these sports were invented by men for men's advantages. So maybe we just need to invent a sport where you stand in tree pose for a long time while they flash pictures of people, and you have to recite what their birthdays are, and then trans women can feel free to compete with us in that sport. And then no one will have a problem with trans women compete with females in that sport, just like no one has a problem with trans men wanting to compete with males, because they are still at a disadvantage, if anything, statistically. And I get some of y'all say some women are born tall and whatever, and it's like, y'all just don't understand statistics if that's your argument. Okay, first of all, it's a distribution spread. It's a statistical thing. It's the same person who is female, if they had been male, would be even taller than they are. You know, so if you don't understand that, like, all I want you to do is go and open ChatGPT and say, hey, can you explain to me why it's not a good argument to say that trans women should be in women's sports because some women have an unfair physiological advantage over other women? Just do that for me. And that's a great exercise for you, by the way. If you want to question your beliefs, is ask ChatGPT to explain the other position to you, or steelman the other position for you. Something I do all the time, by the way. But let's get back to Triggernometry and Helen Webberly and get through a little bit more of her.
But you're still male. So someone who was born male who transitions to look more like a woman, they're still male?
No, their gender identity is female. If you ask them, then what their gender identity is, they say, I am female.
But sorry, I'm genuinely confused. I thought you can't change your sex.
When you say you can't change your sex, what do you mean? I mean, the Equality Act, it lists...
I actually mean biologically. You're a doctor. I'm just asking a medical question.
Well, I'm just trying to clear up, because you're confused. I'm trying to clear up for you.
Help me.
Are you saying you can't change your chromosomes, or are you saying you can't change your body anatomy, or are you saying...
Well,
what are you saying?
It's actually, I think, gametes is my understanding of the biology of it, but you definitely can't change your chromosomes, right?
You definitely can't change your chromosomes,
right.
no.
So then you would be still male. Legally, you can get a document saying you're a woman, but you're not female.
But your gender identity is not dictated by your chromosomes or your gametes or your body shape.
Or gender identity, no, but male and female are biological categories, right?
Do you mean, so you mean biological?
That's why I said sex, right? Sex. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I asked you, can you change sex? And you said no. And then when I asked you if a trans woman is female or male, you said they're female.
Let me explain.
Okay.
It's very difficult because the language is confusing, right? Okay, so if we go back to kind of basic law, look at the Equality Act, and there are 9 protected characteristics. And the Equality Act says, if you reassign your sex. Okay, so that's the kind of the only words we have written down. You reassign your sex. So UK law understands that people reassign their sex. So the sex that was recorded and the gender that was recorded on their birth certificate, you can say, actually, that was a mistake. I had no say in that when I was born, and I would like to reassign my sex. And you know, people thought I was going to be a boy, but actually I'm a girl. So that's the kind of key words we have in UK
Well, that's
law.
legal. I'm just asking scientifically and biologically.
So are you asking, can somebody be transgender? Is that what you're asking? I don't understand what you're saying, what your confusion
I asked you
is.
whether puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones make somebody the opposite sex, and you said no.
No.
But when I asked you if they are then the opposite sex, you said yes. And that's what I'm confused about.
Let me clear up your confusion.
Yeah, thank you.
So your hormones don't make you change sex.
Okay.
Hormones will change the shape of your body,
Yes.
will give you breasts, will give you facial hair, will maybe make your muscles bigger depending on which way you go. So hormones don't change your sex. You can't, that doesn't work like that.
Okay.
And you can't change your gender identity. It's fixed from when you were born, and you can't change it. What the mistake and the confusion is that we assign a label on a child when it's first born and say, aha, you've got a penis, so therefore you're going to be a boy. But actually when that person develops, they're like, that was wrong. I'm not a boy, I'm a girl.
Kelly, we've talked about quite a lot there. Any thoughts?
God, it's so much nonsense, isn't it? It's really difficult to keep up.
Look, the whole thing really kind of boils down to the fact that we need to stop conflating terms, which she does off and on every other sentence. But, you know, most people who are familiar with this world, you know, who are both compassionate and rational, are pretty happy to go, can we please just could use sex and gender differently? Could we, or maybe we need to make up a new word if we need to be able to say gender to be polite when we mean sex sometimes. But if we can all agree that your gender vibes, feelings, roles, self-conception, and presentation might be normative, or might be cross-sex normative, or might be fluid and or non-binary in various ways, that's cool. Okay? But biological sex is an immutable characteristic with a fair amount of secondary sex characteristic wiggle room. Both genetically, you know, there's wiggle room in terms of how you were born, whether you have big boobs or small boobs, for instance, as well as the wiggle room that you can get pharmaceutically. Ironically, both the conservatives and a lot of trans activists are the ones who are conflating the word gender and sex, kind of making it so that it's really hard for us to get anywhere in this conversation. Except when the conservatives say gender, they mean sex, and the trans activists mean a mental, bodily mapping of a self-sex conception. So Helen here keeps kind of bobbing and weaving in how she's using these words, and I really wish that Constantine would kind of land the blow that I want to land. I wrote down what I really wish Constantine would have said to Helen. So you're saying that everyone has a sex identity at least as early as parturition. That's the moment your head pops out your mama pussy. And that sex identity can never change, that it is paramount to their biology, that it's, you know, more relevant than their biology, and that it is more real than their biological sex when it comes to sex spaces. Because obviously one could imagine, as indeed humanity generally has and does, that if your mind is at odds with your body, that it's possible that it's your mind that might benefit most from medical intervention, rather than assuming that the body is just a meat sack. Or one might think both the mind and the body have a point. We are not minds who have bodies. We are mind-body systems. They are inseparable. It's like a whole feedback thing, okay? The limitations of language and a left brain separatism and concretism have allowed the born in the wrong body metaphor to have become something taken so literally that so much of the medical industry could allow itself to believe transitioning children is a good idea. Anyway, these are the points that I wanted to make about just the first few minutes of the podcast. Obviously, the podcast goes on a long time, so I have a lot more thoughts about what both people say. You know, we haven't even gotten to Kellie-Jay Keen yet, and I have plenty to say about her. I'm just going to have to make several more videos because I don't want this to get that long since, you guys don't know me that well yet, some of you. So I don't want to try to ask you to listen to a 5-hour long video. We'll see, which clips I choose and pull out about it. But let's start there because I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about that. Have you listened to the Triggernometry podcast? Do you like debates? And what do you think about the ways that I really try to be very careful and particular in the way that I phrase things, because I think language can be so imprecise and we can have so many sometimes we might agree, but we're saying things with different words or we're talking past each other. So I really try to be careful. So let me know what you think about the way that I've worded a lot of this. So please, dear God, dear God and you, subscribe to my channel. I am at 954 as of this recording, and if I could get to 1,000 after it, that would be so sick. But if you're already subscribed, and or if you're not, then please also like and comment. I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you're not a complete a-hole. Even if you are, go ahead. It'll help me algorithmically. And if there's a hype or anything else that you can do algorithmically, that would be, my birthday's coming up in a couple weeks. But anything that you do to engage with my channel means the world to me. So I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your help on my YouTube journey that I think, at almost 40 years old, I'm finally truly beginning. See you next time.